Well, thank you. Father, we love you tonight. We love your word. We love your truth. We love your grace on our life. God, we just thank you that tonight we're getting bigger in it, getting stronger in you and your kingdom, God, stronger in your ways. God, help us understand and see things we haven't seen before. God, shed light on things that give us answers to questions, things that are holding us up in our lives. Father, we just thank you for understanding, revelation, wisdom. God, and that not only are we looking to see these things, but we're purpose right now to put them into practice in our life and do them. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Well, we're really getting about ready to wrap this class up. We've been talking about the fact last week that the Bible teaches us that, first of all, in James chapter 4, you guys know this by now, the Bible tells us that we're to submit ourselves to God. And that by doing that, it puts us in a position of authority over our enemy, so much so that he will flee from you in terror. And that's a great plan for the sons of heaven, daughters of heaven, is to put your enemies on the run. Don't you agree? Isn't that a good place to be? Where God has had the foresight to realize that you're here with an enemy, but he's given you the tools, the equipment, the wisdom, the understanding to be able to put your enemy in absolute terror of you, just simply because, not because, do you understand this? The enemy is not afraid of the preaching of God's word. He's not afraid in the least bit if we preach the words of Christ. What he is terrified of, however, is when somebody submits themselves to that same authority of Christ. And that, my friend, is a powerful, powerful position. When you submit yourself to the authority of these words, to the authority of the one who spoke them, then that puts you in a place of authority. It puts you in alignment with the one who spoke these words. And that's what this really, I see this class to be, is an explanation somewhat of what's this look like in our day-to-day life? How do we get to this place where we can say, hey, I'm in a place where I'm submitted to God? We talked about a few things, man. First of all, we submit ourselves to the Word. If we can see it in the Word, then we automatically just embrace it as our own. We take it and we say, okay, even if we haven't done it up to that point, we say, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to purpose to do it. We submit ourselves to His Spirit because you're just blind as a goose in a snowstorm if you're not being led as a son. The Bible talks about those that are led by the Spirit of God, these are His sons. The others, there's babes, there's children that are just sons and daughters, but the sons are the ones that are truly led, the ones that are instinctively obedient to listen to the Father's voice, to the Spirit of heaven that's leading and directing you and guiding you in life to get you to a point where, man, you accomplish that which God assigned to you for your life. The only way that you're ever going to do that is if you learn and incline your ear to His voice, become sensitive to the voice of God in your own life and practice it on a daily basis. Just in small things, just get accustomed to it. Just say, God, I don't care if you drove it in the ditch the past 20 times. Say, I hear your voice. I hear the voice of my shepherd, and I am the voice of a stranger I'm not going to follow. And I'm telling you, man, you get out of the ditch, jerk it back up in the road, hit the gas, and you go on. Don't be ashamed. There is no shame. There is no condemnation. There is no reproach for failures. God is not holding you back for your mistakes. Man, He loves it when we trust Him enough to follow His voice. So you follow the voice of His Spirit. You follow the direction and the guidance of the Spirit of God. It says, we read in the Word where it says that He wants to lead us, and He speaks. He's speaking all the time. The problem isn't the communication on His part. The problem is the ears on our part. He's speaking all the time. He's trying to get you to the place that you need to get to. He's bringing you, man, just like being a part of a church, being part of what's going on in this kingdom. All of those things, man, God is speaking all the time. And He's quickening things. He's answering questions. And if you're just not here, like there's people that ain't here tonight that should be here, but they're not. Well, what are they going to? They're not going to hear the things that they should have heard, and it just delays the process. Well, and then the third thing we talked about last week was that we submit ourselves to people, and the Bible teaches us very, very plainly in a number of places that we're to honor and submit to authorities, governing authorities, people in, church leadership, people in, right on down the list. It talks about that God has established authority, and that by honoring and respecting what He's established, we actually wind up honoring and respecting the one who put those things in place. And, without authority, there's just tyranny. And I mean, not tyranny. Even the worst tyrannical ruler, it'd be better to live under that than where there's just mayhem, where there's no authority whatsoever, where there's just, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Chaos. Well, but there's a word for it. But anyhow, when there's no rule and there's no authority, it's anarchy. There you go. That's the word I was trying to think of. It'd be better to live under a tyrant than just where there's just anarchy, where there's no rule, where there's no authority, where it's just a free-for-all. It's just survival of the fittest. It's just, man, if I'm bigger than you, then automatically, if I got a bigger gun than you, if I'm meaner than you, then automatically I'm over you. And I just take whatever you got, and I don't have to work, right? In an anarchical system. But the Bible teaches us that we're to submit ourselves to people, right? And, we looked at some things about how in the greatest one illustration that I can think of is back in Numbers, where it says that, it talked about the rebellion of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And I really rushed through some of that stuff last week, and I probably did it some injustice. But there's at one point through that whole process, Moses, he when he heard it, man, he just fell on his face. They came and they complained, and they'd rebelled, and they just put themselves in opposition to the plan that God had set. Man, he wanted to get them into this place of promise, this promised land that He'd promised them since, for hundreds of years, thousands of years, really. And yet here they were stuck, and they blamed the leadership. They blamed a man. They blamed a person, and they pointed their finger at this man, and they said, "You're the cause why we, and what did you bring us out here just to kill us in the wilderness?" They said these things. And they complained against the leadership and rebelled to the point where Moses fell on his face about it. He knew that these weren't his ideas. That wasn't his plan. He was following the voice of God. He was following the direction of God. He was the man. He was called by God to lead this people out of this, and got them to this point, man, where all they had to do was cross over and possess this land. But they were terrified because of this slavery was still in their hearts. They hadn't been freed in their own beings. They were still terrified of the way they had lived. Well, at any rate, they threw down and just spread this rebellion to the point where, and that's something about rebellion, man, is that you get around people that are just always bad-mouthing leadership and bad-mouthing people in authority, it'll spread and it'll get into you. Man, separate yourself from those people. Separate yourself from those conversations. Don't let it get in you, because it will. And guard your own self. So at one point, and if you would have asked them, do you have a problem with God or you just have a problem with Moses? I guarantee you they would have said, man, we don't got any problem with God. We got a problem with this man. If you would, they're caught up in this whole rebellion. They're getting ready to be swallowed alive. The earth's getting ready to swallow them alive into the pit. And they're so blind, and they're so confused, and they're so deceived that they just did it. This is something that rebellion does. It blinds you, it deceives you, and it blinds you. And so anyway, they carried through this whole thing, and they rebelled. And as I said, man, if you would have asked any one of them, hey, do you got a problem with God? Oh, no, I ain't got a problem with God. I just got a problem with this man, Moses. And, it's a huge trap. Your submission to God is greatly reflected by your submission to people. And hopefully I made that point very clear to you, because it's an absolute truth throughout the Bible. So moving right along, submission is something that, people have come even in this class and they say, I'm so glad you're teaching us about submission, and I'm so happy about all this. And you just know right away they have no idea what it even is. They're like, you just don't get it. You don't understand what even this is. And you go with me to Hebrews. This is, we'll read something here. Hebrews chapter 5. It says this is talking about Jesus when he was in the flesh here on the earth. And it says this, that every high priest taken from among men is appointed. This appointment is from God for men and things pertaining to God, that he can offer gifts, sacrifices for sins, etc. Verse 4, no man takes this honor to himself, but he's called by God. You should underline that. They don't take this honor to themselves. They're called by God, just the same as Aaron was. A priest forever. Christ did not glorify himself to become the high priest, but it was said to him, you are my son. Today I've begotten you. And he also said to him in another place that you're a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek, who in the days of his flesh, this is talking about the Garden of Gethsemane, this is where I'm going, when he had offered up prayers, supplication with vehement cries and tears, underline vehement cries and tears, to him, to God the Father, who was able to save him from death and was heard, because of his godly fear, though he was a son, and you in here are all sons and daughters, you should underline that, that's talking about you. Yet he learned obedience by the things, this whole thing is underlined, by the things which he suffered. And having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation, and I underline this too, to all who obey him. So, the Lord was perfected through his obedience to the things that he suffered. And it says that he's the author of our salvation to those that obey him. He's not authoring your salvation unless you're obeying him. He can't author your life. He can't author the salvation as an ongoing thing in our life. But he's authoring our life. He's authoring the salvation of our life. He's taken us to a point where your life looks like God's intent before the fall of man. It aligns your life with the kingdom of heaven the way it should look, the way that God has called you to be since the foundation of the world. This is what he's talking about. He's talking about this salvation being authored in your life to the point where you, looking at your life, sir, you couldn't tell the difference between the way it looks, the way God called you to look, and for the things that you should be and do, and the difference between when Adam messed this whole thing up and sin and corruption entered into the world. And so he's able to author our life by our obedience. But he can't do it unless you listen to him and unless you'll obey him. Submission is the greatest demand that God has put on man. Our submission is the greatest demand that God has put on man. It's not your tithe, it's not your offerings, it's not your sacrifices, it's not your, it's not your praise, it's not your thankfulness. It's the greatest demand that God has put on man is our submission. And like I said, man, a lot of people have no idea even what it is. But it's huge. So, you hear people say, pray this prayer over their life. They say, God, that I may know you in the power of your resurrection. You ever prayed that prayer? But right in the same breath, it says, and the fellowship of your sufferings. Why don't you flip over there? It's Philippians chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3. So I think a lot of times people leave this stuff out by choice. You know what I mean? It's like, oh yeah, I want to know you, God, and the power of your resurrection. Well, before there's resurrection, guess what? What is there before resurrection? Death. Before you can raise something up, before you can resurrect something, something's got to die. And in this case, it's you. It's your will. It's you dying to yourself. It's you dying to the desire of your flesh. It's you dying really to your hopes, to your dreams, to your ambitions. It's you dying to everything that you've ever dreamed or wanted, and you saying, I am yours to command. You are truly Lord in my life. You are master. I submit my life to you completely. And I take nothing to myself. I'm looking to you to order and direct and guide my steps, and I mean that completely. It's exactly what Jesus did. And it's exactly what gained him the highest seat of honor and authority where he became the author of eternal salvation for all of mankind. See, the way up in the kingdom is down. So there's a anyway, let's read this since I sent you here. It said here in verse 10, this is Philippians 3, verse 10, it says, that I may know him and the power of his resurrections and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death, if by any means I may attain to the resurrection from the dead. So, and in summary, what he had been talking about is all the things that he counted as just loss in his life, man. All the things that he should have been able to take credit for in his flesh, his birth, his place as a priest, his zeal for the things of God under the law and under Israel. All the things that he should have been able to stack up in his life and say, this is who I am as a man, and this is what I could be proud of. He said, man, I count all these things as loss. And not only that, but, man, I want to obtain to the place of the resurrection of the dead by these sufferings. And what these sufferings are, it's not sickness, it's not disease, it's not poverty, it's not lack, and those things are the curse. You understand, man, those things are part of the curse. They're the curse of the fall. The sufferings that it's talking about is the dying of your own will. It's the dying of your flesh. It's crucifying your life and saying, God, you alone are Lord. You alone are master. You alone have mastered death. You alone have resurrected from the dead. You alone are my Savior, my King, my everything, my hero. You're, and it's just as simple. It's just, here I am. I'm yours to command, sir. It's every day. Here I am. I'm yours to command, and that's in word, in deed, in thought, in action. There's nothing that has not been bought. He paid for us completely. And so many of us have no idea. Well, let's move on. So, but let me ask you this. Is that easy? Or is that enjoyable? But yet this is what real submission entails. It's not easy. It's not enjoyable. It's not to walk in such power, to walk in such resurrection power is to walk in this kind of submission and humility and just in crucifixion of ourselves. But, when I read this anyway, I'm reminded of the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus was, which is what we talked about back in Hebrews here a minute ago, where, he's crying out to the Lord, and it's such a pressure on him that, it got to the point where blood is coming from him. He's sweating blood because of what he's looking at, this cup, that the Father is saying, this cup and my will are one and the same for you. Man, I need you to drink this cup. And once he had settled that his Father's will and that cup were one and the same thing, you never hear him say another word about it. He determined right then. He crucified his flesh, his will, his emotion, all of it. And once he came to terms with the fact that cup and the Father's will were one and the same thing, man, he crucified himself to it at that moment. But we get so caught up in, the suffering that he suffered, physically on the cross, and the beating that he took, and the lashes, and then being crucified and all of that. But that's the least thing that he was concerned about here. That's not what he was concerned about was being separated from the Father. What he was concerned about was becoming sin and drinking that cup. That cup was the cup of God's wrath on sin, on everything that had ever been done or ever would be done. He became that sin for us. And I'm telling you, that's what revolted him. His pure, sinless, spotless being that had never known any sin at all. He'd never made a mistake. God's saying, I need you to drink that filthy thing. I need you to become that. I'm going to pour the punishment of my wrath. And I'm telling you, that's what it's talking about in Isaiah, where he says he was unrecognizable as a man. It wasn't the beating that he took. It was the sin that he became. It was such a horrible, wicked, ugly thing. And I'm telling you, man, the wrath of God was poured into that man's spirit, and he became death. He became sin. and he did it for you and me. And that is what pressured him to the point to where, man, he's sweating blood, but he had built this into his life so strongly that, man, I'm here to do my Father's will. You always hear him say things like, I do what I hear my Father say. I do the things that I see my Father do. I say, and he had built a lifestyle of just simple obedience, all the things that we've been talking about, just those submission, and that's what carried him through this test in the garden. I mean, and this is where he just come up against it. It was a moment in time. I mean, Moses and Elijah had come and talked to him about it, just a few chapters before this. And they came down, and man, Peter wanted to set up a tabernacle and, build the tabernacle of whatever, Elijah. And, it's like this glory was there, and he's like, wow. And, but this is submission in a capsule. If you could just take submission and say, okay, what is it? It's this right here. It's coming back to this consecration of not my will, but your will be done. His will and the Father's will were two different wills. Otherwise, there's no need in him saying, nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. Right? If his and the Father's will were one and the same, then there would be no need in saying, nevertheless, not my will. And so he submitted his own will to the Father's will. And then you don't see him looking back a minute. I mean, he set his face like flint, and he walked right through that crucifixion. He walked right through the torture, the beating, all the rest of it, because he had crucified himself back here at the garden. And so when you hear people say, well, and I mean, it meant complete death to him. So this is the ultimate example of submission, and it was by no means easy, was it? It wasn't something that you're just going to get happy about, right? But this was the Father's plan for his life. This was the Father's will. It was the salvation of mankind. And what so many people don't understand is that agreement and submission are not the same thing. Agreement and submission are two totally different things. And because you hear people all the time and you think, well, this is really what they think. They think this is what they think submission is. Was Jesus and the Father in agreement about the plan? He was like, no, I'd rather, if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. And, because you hear people say things like, well, I usually submit to him, but this time I just don't agree. What they just got done telling you was that they usually agree, and now that they have an opportunity to submit, they're just not going to take it. You understand? Well, you really don't have an opportunity to truly submit until you don't agree, and then you do it anyway. And so people think, though, as long as I do what you want to do, and I do it willingly, and we just agree about what should be done, then I'm submitting to you. No, you're not. No, you're operating in agreement. It's all good with you, what we're doing, and you're just operating in agreement. And, they say, well, now I usually submit, but now I just don't see it this way. See what I'm saying? Why people just don't understand what it is? They just don't have real idea of what submission really is. It's not easy. It's not fun. It's not agreement. It's death to your own will. It's when you disagree. It's when you do have an issue with what the decision that was made. It's when you don't like the plan. It's when you are, it's like, I wanted to do it this way. I see it this way. I think it should be done this way. And yet you just smile and say, yes, sir, right away. I'll get it done right now. And I mean, if somebody were to bump into you, they would have thought it was your idea, because you're not projecting to anybody else that you're in disagreement with the plan that was made, or the play that was called. You're not telling everybody, well, man, I can't believe we're doing this. You're not throwing people under the bus that are in authority over you. You're respecting their honor. You're respecting their dignity. You're respecting their decision, and you're submitting to it as if it was your plan, as if it was your idea, as if you had thought it up yourself and you thought it was the greatest idea in the world. You know what I'm saying? And really, honestly, only just a few people saw that Jesus and the Father's plan was two different plans. There was just a couple people, and as a matter of fact, they were sleeping. So, but you don't see him going and talking to anybody else about this. Once he determined that the Father's will was that cup and that he had to do this, man, I'm telling you, his honor for his Father is what carried him through that whole test, and he passed it with 100% flying colors. And because of that, because of his suffering, because of his obedience, he became the author of eternal salvation. He became the highest placed, he was given the name that's above all other names. And it was because of, well, matter of fact, I mean, we're in Philippians. Are you still in Philippians? Back up a page to Philippians chapter 2. Verse 7 said, he made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men. So you couldn't have distinguished him from any other man, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even to the death of the cross. Therefore, or because of that, God also has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every other. So the way that he got there was because of his submission and obedience to the Father. And like I said to you a few minutes ago, the highest demand that God has on man is our submission to him. And until you come to terms with that, you're never going to get to the place that God has called you to get to. Until you just come to terms with the fact that he's God and that you're the created and he's the creator. I mean, we can say it a lot of different ways, but the fact is, and I've said this to you before jokingly, but he's a lot smarter than you and me and all of us here. And you know what? If he's said something and he's directed our lives to do something, then we should it's a great time just to shut up and to say, yes, sir. I'll get right on that. And I mean, make it like it was your own. When you see in the Bible where it says the Lord said, this is a quote from Roger Walsh. You can write this down. This is a great time to shut up and do what he said. It is. And not only just listen, not just shut up and listen, but then to get to doing whatever it was that he told you to do. It's great advice. You guys looking at me like I slapped you. I'm trying to help you, man. I'm trying to help you. I'm not doing this to be sarcastic or mean. I'm just saying, okay, let me illustrate. Peter, they were at this moment in time where the master is breaking the bread at the table. They're at this crux of him laying down his life, being crucified. And he says to Peter, Peter's worried, man, is it going to be me? Because he dips and he's like, hey, somebody's going to deny me. And Peter's like, man, it's not going to be me, is it? He's like, great. Oh, and I was worried there for a second. But then he says, no, but Peter, you know what's going to happen? You're going to deny me 3 times. And what should have Peter said at that moment? According to Roger Wash's quote, shut up and listen and get to doing what the Lord told you to do, right? What would have been a good thing for him to do at that time? Just shut up and listen to what the master had to say, because he could have probably avoided it. But he didn't. He said, no, not me. That'll never happen. Can you see the pride? Can you see the foolishness? The Lord said, you're going to deny me 3 times. What should he have done? Man, how can I prevent this? God, what could I do to make this different? I don't want to deny you. That's what he should have done. That's what humility would have done. But his pride said, no, I'm never going to let that happen. That's not going to be me. So what? And we could talk about example after example where you could apply that, where the Lord said something. It's a great time for us to open our ears and shut our mouth and then do whatever it is that he said to do. All right, moving right along. A lot of people they've never been taught submission. They don't know what it even is. They've never had to submit since school. They buck, argue, defy. They've never had to submit. That just does not work in the kingdom. You'll only go, you just are never going to get anywhere in this kingdom. If you're that way with people, then you're going to be that way with God. That's just who you are. You don't get your way, then you buck, and you won't submit, then you're that way with God. This affects every single area of your life, including your faith. Go with me to, let's look at an example here in Matthew chapter 8. This is the story of the Roman centurion. And he was one of the few individuals that the Lord commended for his great faith. There's very few people that the Lord made mention of their faith. But this is one of the individuals that the Lord actually commended him for his great faith. And it was because of these principles of submission and authority that we're looking at here. And it said this, that he was a centurion, which meant he was a ruler of 100 men, or he was over 100 men. And this was the strictest military system on the planet. You didn't get to be a centurion here by bucking the rules, by defying authority, man, I'm telling you, he hit every step. He was in submission to the people that were over him. He was respectful. He was honorable. He was absolutely in a place where if they, he didn't get there by being insubordinate, by being rebellious. That's not how you get there in this system. So he had come up through the ranks, and he didn't get there by breaking the rules. And some people just think, man, that's just a bunch of bondage. That's just a bunch of junk. No, these same principles are what got him a commendation from the Lord, and caused him to receive. And he said this, man. He said, Lord, my servant is sick, and if you would come and heal him. And the Lord said, I will. I'll do that for you. And he said, I'm not worthy that you should even come under my roof, but you just speak the word only, and my servant will be healed. And it shocked Jesus. I mean, it made an impression in him where it just struck him. And he looked around, and I mean, Israel is around him. The children of Israel, the people of the God's, supposed the people of faith. And he looked at him, and he pointed, I believe he pointed his finger and said, you know what? I haven't seen faith like this in all of Israel. Think about that. These are the people of faith. This would be the church, in our world, in our life, in 2015. He looked at this guy that was outside of the covenant. He wasn't a Jew by birth. And he said, man, I haven't seen, and he pointed to this man, and he said, I haven't seen faith like this anywhere I've looked. And Jesus knew what faith looked like. Faith can be seen. Faith can be heard. And it can be commended. And the Lord did commend him. And that's the thing about him, is he never did or said anything that wasn't true. It wasn't like Jesus was just trying to puff this guy up, or he was trying to prop this guy up. No, he looked right at this man and he told him the truth. He's like, you've got greater faith inside of you than all of Israel. It's an amazing statement to come from the Lord. And it was because of his understanding of authority. It was because of he had submitted himself to this military system that he was part of. And he said this, you just speak the word only. In other words, you just give the command. He's recognizing that Jesus had authority in the realm of the Spirit. Just like he had authority in the realm of natural things and in the Roman army, he understood that Jesus carried authority in the weight of the Spirit in these matters that pertain to a servant. And he said, man, you just speak the word only, and my servant will be healed. And he said, it's because of this. He said, I'm a man under authority, and I have superiors. And I have people, not only that, I have people under me. And when I say to this one, come, and he comes. And I say to this one, go, and he goes. And so he understood what authority was. And he said, Jesus, if you'll just give the command, it'll happen. And I'm telling you, man, that's all that you need for healing to happen in your life, for anything to happen, is for you to have enough confidence in the one, not only the words that he said, but the one that said them. And that's what this man recognized. What he's recognized, the man that said these words. He recognized that if he would just speak that word, that it would happen. Because why? Because of the authority that Jesus walked in. So you see the connection between your faith and authority. One will undermine the other. If you can't walk in submission and respect the authority that is the one that spoke all those words, because we all want the blessing, the covenant of, to not be under the curse. But it goes beyond you just seeing these words or hearing these words and you taking confidence in the one that actually spoke these words and believing that he has the authority to carry them out and make them real in your life. That's what this huge faith that was inside of this man. I wish I could communicate this better to you, as big as it is inside of me, but what he is saying, though, is that I recognize that you have the authority to be able to do this. And so does your understanding of submission and authority have anything to do with your faith? Emphatically it does. Emphatically it does. And that'll explain a lot about why people are having such a hard time walking in faith, because they ignore these principles of submission. They ignore these principles of being in a place where they're submissive to the people that are over them, to God himself. So if you want to walk in faith and be great faith people, then you're going to have to be a person that understands submission and authority. James chapter 4 said, submit, then resist. It's in that order. If you're yielding to your enemy, he's not going to yield to you. You're not in a position to exercise authority until you'll submit, which involves walking by faith. You have to believe that you're in a position of authority by your submission to God. You have to believe. So, but anyway, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Submission is not agreement. Did I make that point clear to you? Submission is not agreement. It has nothing to do at all with agreement. It has to do when you don't agree, and yet you submit yourself regardless, and you do it with an attitude in such a way that nobody could tell the difference, whether it was your plan or someone else's plan. You played it off as if it was your plan. And so, which is really the point I wanted to make to you tonight. So the acid test is when you don't agree. Most of the time, if you're just walking with people and everything's good, you're gonna be walking in agreement. Most of the time, it's not going to be, there's not going to be all this friction and conflict and that sort of thing. I'm not saying this is something that happens every day, but there's going to come times in your life. I can remember, and what's wild about this is I walk in a position of authority here in this house, and it's really weird when you get to this place, because if you're like me, you don't really think of yourself as any kind of an authority figure. And I've met with people and tried to explain things to them and help them and show them where they're screwing up, where they're messing, this is going to mess them up. I remember meeting with a guy a while back with Scott, and man, he just went after Scott in this room, and he really started to irritate me in my flesh. And he was just maligning him and just being hateful about a whole bunch of issues. And but I said some things to him, got him calmed down and whatnot. But you don't really think about it at the time, but it's kind of like one of those Moses and Korah and Dathan and Abiram situations. Judgment didn't fall at that moment like it did for those guys. But I'm telling you, man, that man shipwrecked his life at that moment. That man messed his life up by not listening to what we had to say to him. And not that we're anything. Not that I'm just giving him the counsel of the word. That's it. I'm just telling him, hey, you know what, man, this is what we do. This is why, but not really thinking like, there's this big mandate of God or heaven, that you're trying to steer this guy's course. But none of that was even going on. But I mean, looking back on it, and I didn't even really realize it at the moment, but looking back on it, I realized, man, that guy, he really shot himself in the foot in that meeting by not submitting to the authority that was in his life. And again, man, it's not because I think I'm somebody. It's not because I think I'm anything. It's just simply because we were an authority in his life, and he couldn't see it, man. He couldn't see Pat. It was ugly. So when your flesh says no, you just smile and say, yes, sir. I'll get it done. And, we live in a very soft and undisciplined generation, and it's no wonder that people have such a hard time submitting. They won't even submit to themselves. They won't even, man, you'll get yourself, and you say, okay, flesh, you're going to do some push-ups, right? You guys ever done this? It's like your flesh will get down there, it'll do 5 push-ups, and it'll say, that's it. I'm done. That's all I'm doing. If you ever realize your flesh has a voice, and it's up to you to make it submit and accomplish the purpose of God for your life. It's up to you to bring it into subjection. You're a spirit being, and it's up to you to bring your flesh to a point where it becomes your servant, becomes your helper. It becomes something that gets you to the place where you're going. Submission is an agreement, all right? Submission is when you don't agree. Submission is a huge demand that God has put on humanity to where we'll submit to Him and the things that He set up and the things that He's plainly and clearly showed us in His Word. We have to look beyond the person that may hold that office and honor and respect the position that they hold and submit ourselves to them, even if we don't necessarily agree with them. I'm not saying to obey or follow somebody that's telling you to do something wrong or sin. That's not, hopefully you understand that. I'm not saying anything like that. We're going to, I wish I had another 10 minutes, but I love you guys. You have a good week. I'll see you next time.